Coming up on Network Africa, South Africa formally begins the process of withdrawing from the International Criminal Court. The United Nations accuses DR Congo security forces of carrying out extrajudicial killings during 2 days of protests. And monitors call for an immediate end to hostilities in South Sudan. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Temitope Fagbemi. South Africa has formally begun the process of withdrawing from the International Criminal Court. It has sent an instrument of withdrawal document to the United Nations. Justice Minister Michael Masutha says South Africa is pulling out of the ICC because its obligations are inconsistent with laws giving sitting leaders diplomatic immunity. He also says South Africa does not want to execute ICC arrest warrants, which would lead to regime change. Last year, South Africa refused to arrest Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir, who is wanted by the ICC on charges of genocide and war crimes. Mr. Bashir, who denies the allegations, was attending an African Union summit in Johannesburg.
It may well be that the writers of our statutes at the time when they passed these laws were under the firm belief that it is possible to have harmonious coexistence of both domestication statutes, but in the circumstances it's fast becoming apparent that not only that aspect, but also the aspect of the apparent conflict in the Rome Statute itself between Article 27 and 98 is such that makes it difficult for us to continue to advance our international policy outlook that seeks to promote peace and stability in Africa and elsewhere through dialogue, rather than through interventions of the kind that would effect a forced regime change, as we were apparently expected to do in these circumstances, which is not consistent with our international policy outlook.
In the meantime, Human Rights Watch says South Africa's plan to pull out of the International Criminal Court shows a startling disregard for justice. The head of its South Africa office, Dewa Mavinga, says that the country has long been seen as a global leader on accountability for victims of the gravest crimes. He adds that it is important both for South Africa and the region that this runaway train be slowed down, and South Africa's hard-won legacy of standing with victims of mass atrocities be restored. Well, let's get more on this story from our South Africa Bureau Chief, Betty Dibia. You're welcome to the program, Betty.
Thank you, Topa.
So why has South Africa decided to implement its decision to leave the ICC at this time? It's been over a year since the row over Omar al-Bashir.
Well, you heard the Justice Minister, Michael Masutha, saying that, they had a problem. You have this law which grants immunity to visiting heads of government, and then this other law which was domestic. It's a local law as well, saying that you comply with what is expected of you from the ICC, and the conflict to the government, the ANC-led government. The Immunity Act trumps that of the Rome Statute as domesticated, but the court. Local court said that the government did wrong. They took it to the Supreme Court of Appeal, and the Supreme Court of Appeal said the government did wrong. So they had that issue. But according to the Justice Minister, he now says, now that the executive, which actually signed up to this, has said, okay, we're not going to go along with this anymore since there's a conflict, because we want to be part of the peaceful resolution of crisis in the country, on the continent as well. That statute, not the part of the domestication, falls away in the country. So it's not yet done. The second phase is they have to take it to Parliament now.
So how are people in South Africa reacting to this decision?
Well, you have those who believe African leaders are being targeted. Then you have those who believe you've signed up to this, why pull back? You're disobeying the laws of the land as well, apart from the Rome Statute on the international level, because it is a law that was agreed to, and it's in the statute books of the country. So people are looking at the sentimental aspect and the legal aspect as well. It's been ongoing since al-Bashir was expected last year when he came, and the Justice Minister said Africa, as the AU, and other African countries back this country. So especially from what happened that they didn't arrest President Omar al-Bashir last year. So the debate is ongoing. What is the right thing to do? And you heard him say that they don't want to be the platform for other countries to use this as a tool for regime change in other countries.
So is Parliament likely to pass this decision?
I asked the minister, do you foresee a scenario where the Parliament will say, look, we stay on? The way he put it is this: I am a member of Parliament, and we still have the majority in Parliament, that's the ANC. So if the ANC decides to go by this, they have if it's put to a vote, the ANC would definitely go by this decision. So we'll see what will happen. They've written to Parliament, so they want to go and take that case to Parliament to see if that law will be repealed.
So how long will it take for the process to be completed and for South Africa to exit the ICC when Parliament votes on this?
I'm not quite sure, but some of the experts I spoke to, international law experts, say it will take about a year for this to happen. It won't be an immediate thing. They've taken their intention to the United Nations, as we heard yesterday. So after the issue with the Parliament and then on the global body, I understand it will take about a year or even more.
Besodibia, thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Very much.
Earlier this year, members of the African Union backed a Kenyan proposal to push for withdrawal from the International Criminal Court, repeating claims that it unfairly targets the continent. Set up in 2002 as a last resort to try war criminals and perpetrators of genocide never tried at home, the ICC has opened inquiries involving 9 nations. Now, all but one of these countries are in Africa. They are Kenya, Cote d'Ivoire, Libya, Sudan, Democratic Republic of Congo, the Central African Republic, Uganda, Mali, and most recently, Georgia. Now, the AU, and particularly Kenya, has accused the court of unfairly targeting Africans for prosecution. Cases included a failed case against Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta and a faltering case against his deputy William Ruto for allegedly masterminding deadly post-election violence in 2007 to 2009. To further discuss this, we're now being joined by a professor of international law at the University of Lagos. You're welcome to the program, Professor Fani-Kayode.
Thank you.
Now, what do you make of South Africa's reason for its decision to withdraw from the ICC?
Well, let me begin by saying that all states have the right to quit any arrangement that they are dissatisfied with, just like Britain has tried to exit the European Union. But I must point out that it leaves a sad taste in the mouth, because South Africa wants to be seen as on the forefront of rule of law and compliance with international law. I must say that the principle is that when there is a conflict between an international engagement and a local law, the international engagement must supersede. But if South Africa now feels uncomfortable with applying international law by way of the Rome Statute, it has the prerogative to leave if it doesn't like it.
So do you agree that South African law sometimes that the ICC laws sometimes, comes against the local laws in some of these African countries?
Now, what I'm saying is that if there is a conflict, then the states must bring up their own legislation at par with their international obligation. That is the position of international law. But I said also that states reserve the right to opt out, free entry, free exit. They just have to tidy up if they feel that compliance will be uncomfortable. A similar scenario might play in Nigeria, where we are getting judgment against Nigeria before the ECOWAS Community Court of Justice. Do you think Nigeria cannot say it does not want to apply the protocol of the Community Court, or even suspend its membership of ECOWAS and ask ECOWAS to move its headquarters and the Community Court from Abuja? So these are all sort of scenarios that are not just academic. Every state has the right to go to heaven the way it wants.
So now, Professor, so many African nations and even the African Union have accused the ICC of unfairly targeting African leaders. In your own opinion, is the International Criminal Court really biased?
Well, the leading states in the West are not signatories to the Rome Statute. The United States is not party. And even the United States entered into an arrangement with Nigeria under Article 98 for Nigeria not to arrest any U.S. soldier wanted by the ICC. So there is a lot of duplicity and hypocrisy in the Western world in relation to the ICC. So the Africans might have a basis of stigmatization or bias because the emphasis of the court has been on Africa. I know that the prosecutor, who is an African from Gambia and who has studied law in Nigeria, visited Nigeria not too long ago and defended the ICC against bias. But I think the jury is still out on that.
So finally, Professor, if African countries now decide to pull out of the ICC, follow the path that South Africa has started, how will crimes committed by leaders on the continent then be punished?
Well, it's more difficult because of the impending exit of South Africa and the intention of a country like Burundi to also exit the ICC. It will put the progressive forces and pressure groups, civil society organizations on the African continent on the ropes to up their game in order to ensure good governance in Africa as a whole, and not rely on pronouncements by the ICC to goad unwilling governments to comply with the standards of the ICC.
Well, Professor Kayode, thank you so much for joining us on Network Africa. An extensive investigation by a UN rights body says soldiers, police and the presidential guards are responsible for the majority of the documented human rights violations that occurred during 2 days of deadly street protest in the Congolese capital Kinshasa last month. The government claims that 32 people died, but the UN report says the death toll was higher. According to the report, at least 53 persons, including 7 women and 2 children, were killed, of which 48 were caused by state actors. The report also refers to violence and looting by demonstrators. On the same day, it says that protesters beat 4 police officers to death, with one of the bodies set on fire. Elections due next month have now been postponed to 2018, with critics accusing President Joseph Kabila of trying to limit his stay in power beyond his term limit. The Joint Monitoring and Evaluation Commission has called for a quick deployment of the Regional Protection Force in South Sudan. Chairperson of the Commission, Festus Mogae, also urged the transitional government to ensure an inclusive environment for the political process.
Monitoring and Evaluation Commission is calling for a deployment of the Regional Protection Force in order to establish the necessary security arrangements that will facilitate the full implementation of the peace agreement.
Today, the implementation of this agreement is undoubtedly compromised and partially derailed. But despite the challenges we face, tomorrow and in the future, we remain hopeful that conditions will improve and the full capacity for implementation will be restored once again.
Earlier this month, the United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon told the Security Council in a letter that the South Sudan's government has not taken concrete steps to allow the deployment of a UN-mandated regional force.
Still to come on Network Africa, we'll be discussing how software development skills can help empower women who are unemployed. Please stay with us for details.